If you know me, then you know I've been all over chasing stories. And sometimes, well, those stories chase me. But today's tale I found in the bowels of the World Wide Web. And just when I thought I knew how it was going to end, it kept going in an entirely different direction. Which is how we got here, to the second part of that story. If you missed part 1, do yourself a favor and start from the top. We'll be here when you're done. For the rest of you, let me give you a recap. It all started when an internet rabbit hole led me to the social media channels of a cryptid hunting duo called Monster Max, aka Maxine Moore and her fiancé, Shane Harris. Monster Max was on the verge of becoming internet famous when something horrible happened to the couple, and it all transpired around their very last video. Now, most of what I read online was vague, suspiciously so, but I can smell a good story a mile away, and this one stank. So I kept digging until I found the only soul who claimed to know the truth, a journalist named Nicole Dawes. Over a video call, she told me everything she knew in all its bloody, god-awful glory. You see, as Monster Max's popularity grew, Maxine and Shane's relationship crumbled. But when Maxine told Shane she wanted to pause the channel and their engagement, they were just one video away from making it big. So he convinced her to finish their most dangerous hunt yet for the infamous Lone Pine Mountain Devil. They found the monster all right. They even did a live stream that racked up thousands of followers. But then, everything went horribly, horribly wrong. The mountain devil attacked, and Shane ran, abandoning Maxine to a fate worse than death. You'd think that'd be the end of it, but as the journalist reminded me, everything that happened that night happened live, which meant Shane had to face something far more dangerous and bloodthirsty than some monster. He had to face the internet. You're listening to RunFool. I'm Rodney Barnes. This is episode 21, Lone Pine Mountain Devil, Part 2. It was the park rangers that found Shane first. They combed the desert hills in the early hours of the morning till they discovered him trembling and traumatized in a shallow cave. By the time they discovered Maxine, it was too late. She was already dead. Police arrived to a scene as horrific as it was strange. The mutilated body of a young woman stranded in the desert wilderness, and her fiancé, alive and well, with hardly a scratch. Needless to say, they were more than suspicious, so they took Shane to a dingy, windowless room in the county station and demanded answers. Shane tried to explain the Lone Pine Mountain Devil to the officers, but when he described the massive four-winged demon that skinned its prey, all he got were raised eyebrows. And when they asked him why Maxine was dead when he'd escaped, well, Shane didn't have a good answer for that either. He looked down and stuttered into his styrofoam cup of burnt coffee. She'd been hurt, he said. She couldn't run. What Shane didn't say was that he did. The monster tore Maxine open and Shane ran. Ran like the coward he always knew he was. How do you explain to the police that you left the love of your life to die? But Shane maintained his innocence. His story was simple. The Lone Pine Mountain Devil existed and had attacked his fiancée. It was one of the most bizarre alibis the investigators had ever heard, but despite their best efforts, they couldn't rule it out. Sure, there was no proof the monster existed, but Shane's live stream recorded something. In the footage, the shadow of the alleged mountain devil could be seen through the trees, but when it swooped in to attack Maxine, that was exactly when Shane dropped the rig. The rest of the stream captured nothing but muffled audio of the attack. The next day, Shane walked out of the station a free man. For now. But as he stepped into the sun, he dragged behind him a secret a hell of a lot heavier than shackles. You see, Shane was innocent. But when he recounted that horrifying night to investigators, he left something out. After the attack, Shane hid all night in that shallow cave, but he didn't stay there. Once dawn broke and he was sure the monster was gone, Shane left. That's when he found Maxine. She was draped across the low branches of a tree. Her abdomen was empty, fresh blood still dripping down her untouched limbs, and her face, where her face used to be, was ripped to raw, glistening sinew and bone. This tragic, disfigured thing was all that was left of his Maxine. Shane stumbled towards her, shaking, when he saw her breathe. Maxine opened her torn mouth in a rasping gasp, and her brown eyes met Shane's. She was still there, alive, but barely. Shane sank to his knees, his mind racing. He couldn't call for help. His phone was gone, and Maxine's wasn't in her pockets. A horrible realization dawned on him. Help wasn't coming. Even if it was, she wouldn't make it. Beside him, Maxine strained for breath. Tears filled Shane's eyes. He held her left hand, the one that still had his engagement ring on her finger, and begged Max for forgiveness. She looked at him, her eyes full of pain, then past him, focused on something in the brush. Shane followed her gaze and froze. There, glinting in the dawn sun, was his pistol, the one the mountain devil knocked from his hands hours before. Shane looked back at Maxine wheezing beside him and was flooded with an unwelcome memory. The bighorn sheep they'd found on the trail, skinned, suffering, and barely alive. Maxine had taken the pistol from Shane and put it out of his misery. She did what he couldn't. Afterward, she'd said to him the words that echoed in his head now. "I hope you do the same for me." Shane's stomach dropped. He turned back to her, shaking his head. No, Max. I can't." But Maxine stared at him, her eyes pleading. A whimper escaped her mouth, and Shane began to sob. It was his fault. He had done this to her. He'd pushed Maxine there and left her to die. But he wouldn't do it again. He couldn't. He owed her that much. Finally, Shane nodded. Maxine's eyes filled with gratitude. He brought her blood-stained hand to his lips and whispered that he loved her. It was all he could say. "I love you, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He kept repeating it as he retrieved the gun, and as he aimed the pistol at her heart, and again as he looked her in the eyes for the last time, and pulled the trigger. It was a mercy killing. He knew that. It was the mountain devil who'd torn Maxine apart, but Shane carried a guilt so crushing, he might as well have gutted her himself. After the police let him go, you'd think the first thing Shane would do was leave Lone Pine, to put as much distance between himself and that terrible place as possible. But Shane stayed. He couldn't outrun his shame, so he wallowed in it. He barely slept, plagued by the image of Maxine's eyes peering at him through her raw, mutilated face. His days weren't much better. He spent them alone in the rusted trailer he'd rented on the edge of the desert, hunched over his laptop. The live stream video of the Lone Pine Mountain Devil, of the attack, had gone viral. It racked up over 5 million views before admins took it down. But as they say, the internet is forever. Whatever you put there never really dies. It's just resurrected. The live stream made its way to the dark corners of the web where people watched the video with morbid curiosity, likening it to a modern snuff film. Much like the Lone Pine police, these people had their suspicions. The question of whether the video was an absurd tragedy or murderous hoax divided the web. If you've ever been on Twitter, you know hell hath no fury like a horde of internet strangers. And leading that charge was my new friend, Nicole Dawes. Like I mentioned, Nicole was the technology reporter for some big-time publications, ones I won't name here in case they sue my ass. And her specialty was internet culture. So when Monster Max went viral, Nicole was convinced she'd found the piece that bumped her up from reporter to columnist. She dug up everything she could on the Lone Pine Mountain Devil. She found almost nothing, but she did unearth plenty on Maxine and Shane. She learned that while Maxine was a former hairstylist, Shane was former military, a government-trained killer. As a journalist, Nicole had reason to believe Shane murdered Maxine, but as a woman who listened to her gut, she was sure of it. And she had a hunch that the entire live stream was orchestrated to provide Shane with an alibi. As far as Nicole was concerned, there was no Lone Pine Mountain Devil. The real monster was Shane. Nicole wrote a series of pieces supporting this theory, and Shane read them all. He spent weeks online, his laptop screen illuminating his face in the dark. Everywhere he looked, he was being dragged across the web. Reddit, YouTube, TikTok, even Monster Max's fans turned against him. Holed up in that trailer in the desert, it all felt far away, surreal. But then, the internet found him. All Shane's information, his email, his phone number, suddenly appeared online. He'd been doxxed. He was flooded with vile messages from strangers. It was the kind of constant attention he'd always wanted, but in the worst way. He was forced to change his number, his email address. But just as he was about to delete all of Monster Max's accounts, Shane decided to post one last video. He set up his tripod and winced at the image of his own haggard face on his phone. He was a husk of the influencer he once was. But it didn't matter now. Shane steeled himself, then pushed record. In the video, he spoke directly to Monster Max's followers and announced that he was going to give them the proof they wanted. Shane paused, looking into the camera. He was going to prove that the Lone Pine Mountain Devil exists. For the next week, Shane prepared. He sold his fancy influencer gear and used the money for what he really needed: protection. His basic pistol wouldn't hack it against a winged monster from hell. He also did his research, scouring the internet for anything on the Lone Pine Mountain Devil. But like Nicole wrote in her articles, there was almost nothing out there. What little Shane found looped back to the same mysterious source. It was as if the Mountain Devil only existed on the internet and been conjured into existence just to torture him. In the afternoon, Shane drove his passenger van towards the hills and took the dusty roads as far as they would go until he had to continue on foot. This time, though, he was traveling light. He carried a newly purchased rifle, a GoPro, and of course, his phone. He timed everything to ensure he arrived at nightfall, when he knew the Mountain Devil was active. He trekked for the next 2 hours, and before long, it was dusk. He was worried he'd lost course when he smelled something, an unmistakable rancid odor, and then he heard the flies. Shane wandered off the trail until he came across the mutilated carcass of a mountain lion, or at least what used to be one. Its face was peeled off clean, the telltale sign of the devil's prey. Shane wondered if it was the same mountain lion that had run from them terrified that fateful night. He shook his head in pity when a blood-chilling shriek came from the distance. The cry knotted his stomach. Whether he was ready or not, the Mountain Devil was close. Shane strapped on his GoPro and took off towards the sound. He moved through the brush when another, louder scream pierced the night. Shane followed it, snaking between boulders and trees until he came to a dead end at the mouth of a cave. It was dark now, too dark to see inside, but Shane didn't dare use his flashlight. Instead, he crept toward the edge of the cave and peered inside. In the darkness, a massive shadow shifted and swayed. There was a horrible squelch, the sound of teeth ripping flesh, then a low, guttural purr. Shane didn't know if he wanted to vomit or flee. Instead, he gripped his rifle, stepped into the mouth of the cave, and fired straight into the shadows. An ear-splitting shriek echoed from the depths. Shane backed out, rifle aimed as the monster stepped out of the darkness. It emerged headfirst, enormous black eyes searing into Shane, followed by its hulking, scaly body. Shane took another step back, but the monster kept coming. Then it unhinged its jaws, and Shane froze. He stared at those layers of jagged teeth when he thought of Maxine's face, raw, disfigured, eyes pleading, and Shane shot the bastard in the gullet. The lone pine mountain devil screamed in pain, blood pouring from its throat. Shane didn't hesitate. He fired again, piercing its leathered wing, and the beast crumpled. He couldn't believe it. He had it cornered. Shane raised his rifle and took aim at its head. One shot, and he could clear his name and kill the thing that made Maxine suffer. But before he squeezed the trigger, the mountain devil reared its head and wailed. Shane winced. It wasn't like the creature's other screams. It was a desperate sound, high-pitched and uncanny. The devil repeated it again and again, when the same sound echoed somewhere in the distance. That's when Shane realized it wasn't a scream at all. It was a call. He looked up and his heart stopped. Soaring toward him with incredible speed was another creature, reptilian tail, bat-like wings. There wasn't just one lone pine mountain devil. There were two. Above him, the second mountain devil let out a primal, earth-shattering scream and dove toward him. Shane tried to shoot, but it was too fast. The monster landed between him and the wounded devil and stretched its enormous wings, blocking Shane from its companion. It let out a low, rattling growl. Shane backed away, rifle raised, as the beast's pitch-black eyes stared him down, but it did not move, not even when Shane turned around and ran. Back in his trailer, Shane paced, adrenaline still pumping through his veins. He'd run away, again. He told himself it was because he was outnumbered, that he wasn't prepared to face two mountain devils. But really, it was more than that. It was the way the wounded one called for help. Even out of the mouth of a monster, Shane recognized that sound. A desperate cry from one animal to another, and the other devil answered it. It came back to protect its companion. It did what Shane failed to do for Maxine. He was no better than those beasts. No, he was worse. His only consolation was the footage. The GoPro recording was dark, but better than the original live stream. All he had to do was upload it to Monster Max's accounts and show the world the truth. Shane opened his laptop and went to YouTube when a notification popped on screen. His account had been suspended. His stomach dropped. He frantically opened Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. Every Monster Max account was either suspended or banned completely. Just like that, Shane was back to pacing. If he couldn't post on his verified accounts, he couldn't clear his name. But even if he could post, he realized no one would likely believe him anyway. His reputation was in shambles. A blurry monster video from his own account wasn't going to convince anyone. No, the evidence had to come from someone else, someone who no one would doubt, and maybe from the person who destroyed his reputation to begin with. Shane had Nicole Dawes' email, her phone number too. She'd contacted him more than once requesting an interview or a comment. Shane had ignored every message and call, but Nicole didn't give up. She was tenacious. He had to give her that. And now he was going to offer her exactly what she wanted. He typed out a text. "I'm ready to tell the truth," and hit send. Seconds later, his phone pinged. Nicole and Shane met at a local tavern. They sat across from each other sipping bad coffee, looking like outsiders in that little desert town, in the exact opposite way. Shane's beard was shaggy and his eyes hollow. He looked as if he had just stumbled in from the desert like some tumbleweed of a man. Nicole, meanwhile, was sharply dressed, fresh off the plane from New York City, the only black woman in the joint. It didn't take much for her to convince her editors to fly her out. She pitched the Monster Max story hard. It'd be a true crime internet piece, something that could be optioned out for adaptations, podcasts, a documentary series, hell, maybe even a movie. As soon as she got Shane's text, she booked a ticket. Nicole was chatting him up like she always did to loosen up her interview subjects. And Shane, for his part, was perfectly cordial. Nicole was surprised. She dragged his name across the World Wide Web after all. But the dude was serene, almost monk-like. When they finished their coffee and small talk, they drove to the hills. Nicole had agreed to conduct the interview near the scene of the attack. Her colleagues warned maybe it wasn't wise to meet a suspected woman killer in the desert. But Nicole didn't scare easy, and she wasn't about to back out on a career-making story. Shane promised he'd go completely on record, all cards on the table. Nicole could report it however she wanted. All he asked was that she record the interview on video. Nicole thought that was odd, but hey, if he was going to kill her, he probably wouldn't ask her to document the evidence. But just to be safe, she brought mace. They made the drive into the desert, and then, much to Nicole's dismay, they were forced to go the rest of the way on foot. She was used to walking. She was a New Yorker, but Manhattan didn't have rattlesnakes. Shane assured her that the hike wouldn't be more than a couple of hours, but the sun sank into the hills fast, and the howling chorus of coyotes in the distance wasn't exactly reassuring. Nicole was getting anxious to get the interview and get out when Shane finally announced they'd made it. He sat to light a gas camping lantern while Nicole set up her camera and tripod. "Over there," Shane said, pointing toward the hills. "That's where it happened." And then he began to talk. As soon as he did, it was like a dam broke. Nicole tried to interject, ask questions, but Shane could hardly stop. He told her all about Maxine, about how much he loved her, and how the Monster Max channel was tearing them apart. Then he told Nicole about what happened the night of the live stream. But it was the same story Shane told the police. Nicole felt like a sucker. She'd come all that way to the middle of nowhere for this? She was about to call him out when Shane made one more confession. He had killed Maxine, just not in the way anyone thought. Shane explained how he found Maxine that morning barely alive and suffering. Tears streamed down his cheeks. It was a mercy killing, he muttered. Nicole was speechless. This was not what she had planned. Did he really expect her to believe that the Lone Pine Mountain Devil was real? Shane shook his head. No, he said, he didn't, which is why he needed her to see for herself. Shane stood. All she had to do was keep recording, he said. He'd do the rest. Then he put a hand on Nicole's shoulder. "Whatever you write, I hope it gets you what you're looking for." With that, Shane trekked toward the hills. Nicole didn't know what the hell that meant or what was happening, but she didn't like it. She went to yell after Shane, to tell him she wasn't going to stick around for his weird cryptic BS, when a demonic shriek split the night. Nicole froze. There on the hillside was something that she could only describe as a monster. It was half mammalian, half reptilian, with 4 massive wings. She was terrified and mesmerized, but still, she got behind the camera and kept recording. Shane walked up to the beast, waving his lantern as it swooped in. It dove, hovering over him, talons outstretched. When he shot it, once, twice. On the third shot, the devil crashed to the dirt, screaming in distress. But Shane didn't shoot it again. Instead, he let it call out over and over. Nicole was bewildered. She zoomed in on Shane. He looked calm, as if he was waiting for something. And then she heard it, another otherworldly scream. Nicole turned to see a second Lone Pine Mountain Devil racing toward him. But what happened next transpired so swiftly, she could hardly process it. The second Mountain Devil descended. Shane shot at it again and again, but the monster got to him first, and his talons sliced him open. Shane stood bleeding, screaming in agony. But just as the 2 Mountain Devils swarmed their prey, he threw the gas lantern to the ground. The dry brush went up in flames, catching the devils' reptilian bodies. The creatures shrieked in pain as the inferno bloomed around them. Nicole watched the scene in horror. It was too late for Shane. She had to go or burn alive herself. As she went to grab the camera, she saw it was still zoomed in. smiled sadly, but Shane was free now, she said. As for her, she never got what she was looking for. The prestige, the validation, she was still searching for it. Nicole looked out from my computer, her eyes hollow. She didn't think she'd ever stop. After our call ended, I was shocked at how late it was. I'd been gazing at screens so long I didn't realize I'd spent the whole day online. So I shut my laptop and went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. What Nicole told me had me thinking. Maybe what keeps us up at night shouldn't be the Lone Pine Mountain devils of the world. Maybe the real monster is closer than we think, hiding on our homepage or lurking in our notifications. A thing so insidious that if you're not wary, it'll eat at you so slowly you won't notice until it's already consumed you. Something to think about. In the meantime, consider subscribing to the show and maybe leaving a review. After all, we've all got a monster to feed.